On July 19, 2007, two investigators arrived at the residence of 63-year-old Timothy MacNeil, who resided in the Rolando area of San Diego, California, USA. The man had returned home around midday to have lunch with his stepdaughter, Bray. According to the girl, while they were eating, an unidentified masked individual stormed into the house and shot her stepfather in front of her, subsequently fleeing the scene. Bray immediately dialed 911. Upon arrival, patrol officers found the victim lying face down on the floor in a pool of his own blood. The man was deceased, having sustained multiple gunshot wounds. The victim was wearing a shirt but no pants, which seemed unusual. It was possible he was in the process of changing clothes. The girl was in shock, as the murder of someone close to her had occurred just 20 minutes prior, right before her eyes. She was struggling to control herself and was in hysterics, so officers calmed her down. She turned out to be the sole witness who had survived the attack and could potentially aid in identifying the perpetrator. At the time of the tragedy, the girl was 17 years old. She became a valuable resource for law enforcement, capable of providing them with crucial leads. In the aftermath of such crimes, witnesses are uncommon, making the search for the murderer a significant challenge. Once her hysteria subsided, Bray recounted that a masked, armed assailant had entered the house. He ordered Bray to tie up Timothy and then tied her up as well. The perpetrator knew there was a safe containing money and valuables in the house and demanded that Tim open it, but the stepfather refused and was then shot. Subsequently, the villain fled through the back door. The police went to the back door, which was open, and began examining the area. They soon discovered a .357 Magnum revolver, which was likely the murder weapon. The firearm was sent to the lab for analysis. Police noticed a phone on a pool table and inquired of Bray how she had called 911, considering the phone was there and she was bound. The girl responded that she had managed to reach the phone and dial the number using her tongue. Following this, police officers, along with search dogs, canvassed the entire vicinity around the house, seeking additional clues and witnesses. According to one neighbor, he had only heard 4 bangs, which he dismissed. The man hadn't realized they were gunshots. However, 20 minutes later, the area was cordoned off by police and special services helicopters. Only then did the neighbor understand the gravity of the situation and approached the police himself. A similar account was given by many of the interviewed neighbors. Several individuals provided more significant insights. They stated that after the shooting, they had seen a young man running out of the victim's house in broad daylight, jumping over a hedge and dashing down the street at full speed. During the investigation and examination of the crime scene, 2 key pieces of evidence were discovered near the back entrance. These were fragments of dark fabric from clothing that the perpetrator had snagged and left behind while escaping. Following a path from the house, a black mask was found on one of the trees. The perpetrator's DNA was likely to be present on these items of clothing. That day was very hot, and police were certain that the perpetrator had been sweating. Therefore, all materials were sent for examination. During the analysis, forensic experts determined that the fragments were remnants of a T-shirt, most likely worn by the attacker. The recovered pistol was indeed confirmed to be the murder weapon. It was registered to the deceased's second wife, who had passed away a few months earlier. As it turned out, the woman had kept the weapon in her bedside table. Hence, the police were convinced that Timothy knew his killer, and the perpetrator knew where the weapon was stored. He was likely someone from the victim's close circle. The 63-year-old esteemed lawyer Timothy MacNeil, who had become the victim of a crime, did not fit the profile of someone likely to be murdered by common criminals. This event stunned all of Timothy's relatives, acquaintances, and neighbors. The more the police analyzed the deceased's personality, the more they were astonished at how much he differed from the typical profile of a shooting victim. Tim had never led a dissolute or dubious lifestyle, nor had he associated with dangerous individuals. Everyone described him as a wonderful family man, a good person, and a friend with a great sense of humor. He could find a funny side of everything, which literally charmed everyone. Tim was a brilliant lawyer, demonstrating exceptional skill in the courtroom. He was a true professional, respected by all and undefeated for many years. However, a successful lawyer in his activities could cross the path of an influential rival who could get rid of him, so investigators began to consider this version. A survey of the victim's colleagues showed that Tim did indeed have some detractors who might hold a grudge against him. But none of them believed that this could be a motive for such a brutal attack in the lawyer's home. The detectives agreed with these doubts. It seemed that a more personal motive was present in the case. For those close to the lawyer, his death was a terrible tragedy. It was a loss that could not be replaced. From his first marriage, he had a daughter, Erin. The girl repeatedly emphasized that he was very kind and could solve any problems through dialogue. The deceased was married twice, the second time to Doreen Hansen, for whose children he became a stepfather. He met Doreen at work. The woman came to his law firm when she was divorcing her husband, and Tim helped her resolve all the legal issues. The couple had a lot in common, both divorced with children. This brought them closer. The stepdaughter's name was Bray, and she got along well with the man's family. The girl made friends with Tim's daughter, who lived with her mother. Bray was smart and cheerful, always smiling. They called each other sisters. Bray was an excellent student at school, dreamed of becoming a lawyer and following in her stepfather's footsteps. She also spoke French and could speak it fluently. She formed a close relationship with Tim, as he was able to become a full-fledged father to her and practically raised her as his own daughter from the first days of meeting his wife. According to those close to him, Tim behaved with her children like a real loving father. When Tim's biological daughter learned about what had happened, she immediately called Bray, as she was afraid that something might happen to her as well. However, she could not reach her stepsister, but only got in touch with her aunt. The woman reported that everything was fine. Despite the shock and the upheaval that the stepdaughter had experienced, the girl was to be questioned at the police station to get valuable clues. One of the statements made by 17-year-old Bray immediately puzzled the investigators. According to her, the attacker changed his voice using an electronic device so that it sounded like a cartoon character. This was uncharacteristic of such crimes, as murderers prefer to appear as intimidating as possible rather than cute and funny. In the history of detectives' investigations, this had happened for the first time and seemed very unlikely. Another strange circumstance was that during the interrogation, the name Nathan was mentioned. According to Bray, that was what the robber was called. She accidentally mentioned it when speaking to the investigators. But when the police pointed this out, the girl began to worry and denied that she had spoken the name. This aroused suspicion among the investigators. Apparently, Bray was hiding something. It was worth taking a closer look at the victim's stepdaughter. However, the girl was unaware that the interrogation was being recorded on cameras, and all the words she uttered were already on the records. The interrogation took several hours, after which the witness was taken to Aunt Bonnie's house. She chose this place herself, as she felt safe here after what had happened. Considering the very strange circumstances of the crime, there was a high risk that the killer would return to eliminate the witness. But the oddities voiced by Bray did not end there. The investigators immediately got the feeling that the girl knew much more than she was telling law enforcement officers. When Bray saw a composite sketch of the criminal on television, which was compiled from the words of neighbors who had seen the guy running down the street, she immediately noted the discrepancy. The girl said that his chin was more square. But how could she know that if the criminal was wearing a mask when he committed the attack, and she could not see his face? Aunt Bonnie heard this and doubted Bray, so she reported it to the police. At the police station, the young woman corroborated the statements, but couldn't explain how she could identify the masked assailant's face. After scrutinizing the stepdaughter's testimony, detectives concluded she was lying. From that moment, the crime victim transformed into a murder suspect. Less than 12 hours after the crime, Around 11 p.m., officers arrived at the young woman's aunt's home where she was staying to arrest Bray Hansen, who was suspected of murdering her own stepfather. As soon as the officers arrived and voiced their suspicions, the young woman stood, turned, and clasped her hands behind her back. She offered no resistance and didn't deny her guilt. According to the police, this behavior was typical of a criminal who realized they had been caught. If she were innocent, she should have fought the arrest. This gave the detectives confidence that they had their person. However, she didn't seem like the killer who pulled the trigger. Someone else was likely involved in the case, and Bray had an accomplice. The detectives now had to figure out what role the well-known attorney's stepdaughter played in his murder. Initially, it was shocking that such a young and charming girl was the perpetrator, and it was unclear what her motive could be. Despite her youth and appealing appearance, she began to share the details of a diabolical plot aimed at Tim MacNeil. However, according to the young woman, she was not guilty. She unintentionally became involved in a conspiracy planned by her brother, Nathan. Now, the detectives heard this name again. According to her, when a young man broke into the house, tied her up, attacked her stepfather, and started fighting with him, she couldn't watch because she was very frightened. The girl turned away, and when she heard the shot, she thought Tim had gained the upper hand in the fight for his life and had shot her brother. However, when she turned her head, she saw that the man had lost the fight and had been killed. Tim MacNeil was shot a day after his 63rd birthday. According to the young woman, Bray did everything she could think of to stop the development of this deadly tragedy. She tried to dissuade her brother from murder, but she couldn't do it. According to the stepdaughter, she dialed the police several times to report the situation, but she never had the courage to press the call button because she was very afraid of her brother's vengeance. The news hit Tim's biological daughter, Erin, the hardest. According to her, it was the only time in her life that her heart was truly broken. The girl couldn't believe that her father had been murdered by people close to him, the children of his second wife, whom he was close to and raised as his own. The man provided them with a decent life, and that was how they thanked him for it. The attack looked like a real betrayal. Meanwhile, the police needed to move forward. They still hadn't received any information about Nathan and were looking for him. According to Bray, he lived in Arizona because he was studying at a local university. Before these words, the police weren't even aware that she had a brother. The detectives suspected that the killing was somehow connected to the complicated relationship between the children and Tim. The problem was much deeper and personal. They continued to question the young woman to get the truth from her. Eventually, during the interrogation, Bray admitted that she was indeed guilty of her stepfather's murder, as she played a significant role in her brother's plot. The girl admitted that she and Nathan planned the murder together. They considered options such as beating the man to death with a bat without causing pain or injecting him with a toxic substance. In the end, they decided not to dirty their hands and to hire a hitman. They contacted a contract killer, left cash, a house key, and a revolver in a small box in the yard of the house, but the hitman never showed up at the appointed time. This significantly complicated their task because they wanted to kill the man through someone else's hands. Her brother began to insist that they had to act themselves. According to Bray, it was after this that she changed her mind about participating in the crime and refused her brother. Until that moment, she allegedly hadn't realized the seriousness of the plan. She thought it would never happen. Nathan was unhappy that his sister had backed down, and he himself wasn't going to give up, so he decided to act alone. One day, he burst into the house and murdered his stepfather. The police were once again skeptical of the girl's account. They suspected she was concealing something. The fact that Nathan broke into the house at the exact moment the stepfather was with Bray suggested he knew about her plans and likely acted in concert with her. Consequently, investigators continued to pose leading questions to draw Bray out. Eventually, the girl became entangled in her own words and admitted to colluding with her brother. She intentionally arranged a lunch meeting with her stepfather and informed Nathan. Her brother arrived at the house with a weapon at the appointed time. According to the plan, they bound Tim's hands behind his back and forced him to kneel in the laundry room. In this position, Nathan shot the man in an execution-style manner, but missed. The second bullet grazed his side. The third shot struck Tim in the face, but failed to kill him. So the fourth shot was to the back of the head as the stepfather fell lifelessly to the floor. During the interrogation, detectives were stunned by how the stepdaughter, who everyone had known as Tim's loving daughter, described the crime with a cold heart. It seemed as though she attempted to feign tears at some point, but couldn't. Afterwards, Bray calmly looked the police officer in the eye and coolly described the conspiracy and the actual murder. It was strange to observe this 17-year-old girl describe each shot fired at her stepfather without any emotion. However, she continually tried to shift the blame for the crime onto her brother. Bray claimed that she was afraid to tell the truth to the emergency services when she called because Nathan had intimidated her. The guy told her that if he was arrested, she would definitely be arrested as well. But her words raised many questions. So to get a more objective picture, it was necessary to hear the testimony of the second party in the conspiracy, Nathan's brother. Meanwhile, the guy was already being sought in Arizona. Arizona police worked quickly and traced his location. Right in the middle of the night, they arrived at his home, pulled him out of bed, and arrested the 20-year-old. Detectives from San Diego, who were leading the murder investigation, learned of the arrest and flew to Phoenix the next morning to question the perpetrator. Investigators immediately informed the murderer that his sister had told them everything. He remained silent and requested a lawyer. But just a moment later, Nathan changed his mind and expressed a desire to speak with the detectives. At that moment, he voluntarily waived his right to an attorney and provided the investigators with very important information. The guy spoke very calmly and deliberately. He confessed that he was indeed at the crime scene and witnessed his stepfather's death. According to Nathan, he didn't have a real motive. Of course, he was angry with his stepfather because of his attitude towards him since he had recently fired him from his company. However, the young man didn't really want him dead. When his stepfather saw him with a weapon in his hands, he begged the guy not to shoot and just to leave the house, and he wouldn't report him to the police. But Nathan refused. The young man shot Tim, and he fell to the floor. The man repeated the same phrase, "You killed me." At that moment, Nathan panicked and fired a finishing shot into the back of Tim's head. After this confession, the guy immediately requested a lawyer. After that, Nathan began to deny his involvement in the murder and assured investigators that he had not pulled the trigger. Then he was asked if Bray had committed the crime. But the young man did not answer this question directly. He only said that Bray was scared, so she decided to blame everything on him. However, the suspect also denied shooting her stepfather and shifted the blame onto her brother. At this stage, the police needed to figure out who shot the man, and for this, it was necessary to understand who had the motive. Why did the once warm relationship between Tim and his wife's children become toxic? When he met his second wife, the girl was 4 years old, and the boy was only 6 years old. He had practically raised them. While Bray was bright and cheerful, Nathan presented a genuinely difficult persona. While Tim tried to fill a fatherly role, Nathan resisted, rejecting his mother's new partner and causing problems at every turn. These issues worsened as Nathan grew older. Both siblings blamed their mother's struggles with alcohol and depression, which they felt led her to constantly burden them with her problems. This made it difficult to build a connection with their stepfather. Bray accused her mother of exploiting her, as if she had intentionally given birth to a daughter for that purpose. Nathan complained about his mother's physical discipline, which she used harshly for even minor offenses. Because of this, he was forced to move in with his grandmother in Arizona when he turned 12. This move positively impacted the young man, helping him with his studies and leading to employment as he got older. He was skilled with computers and, overall, was a decent guy. Nathan excelled at university and aspired to a better life. In 2006, their mother took her own life by taking a lethal dose of medication. This event brought the children and Tim closer, especially Nathan. He actively sought to build a relationship with his stepfather. Nathan had a girlfriend at this time who got along well with Tim. Therefore, she encouraged her boyfriend to maintain a warm relationship with Tim. According to Nathan, it made no sense for him to kill the man. It was actually more advantageous for him if Tim was alive because he provided for and took care of them. For instance, Tim had recently purchased him a new computer, which he used to work at Tim's company until a conflict arose and Tim fired him. Despite this, they continued to communicate, and Tim provided him with financial assistance. According to Nathan, at the same time, Tim's relationship with Bray significantly deteriorated. They had been very close before. She was constantly angry and took her frustration out on her stepfather because he had begun dating a new woman. The stepdaughter felt rejected and alone, and she wanted revenge on the man, as she had no other close relationships to rely on after her mother's death. Her stepfather had been everything to her, and suddenly, he started distancing himself. Police officers recalled that during the interrogation, the girl had casually mentioned feeling worthless due to Tim's recent behavior, but they did not understand what she meant at the time. Now, the picture was becoming clearer. Investigators established that shortly before his death, Tim had indeed met a woman named Kim Marabita and had begun a romantic relationship with her. Bray became extremely jealous of her stepfather after this, considering him her possession and worrying that he might completely remove her from his life. The girl admitted that she took it as a great blow, as she genuinely loved her second father, but she began to feel that she played no role in his life. Bray was most hurt when her stepfather did not celebrate his birthday with her. Instead, he wanted to celebrate with his new love. She also admitted that she liked everything about Tim, and the perpetrator cannot understand how this love turned into hate. Nathan claimed that he was not in San Diego at the time of the crime, but this was a lie, as traces of the young man's DNA were found on a mask discovered nearby, and his phone's geolocation confirmed his location there. The descriptions of neighbors who saw the young man running away also matched Nathan's appearance, meaning he was definitely present at the crime scene. Police believe that both teenagers were involved in the man's death. Both were charged with first-degree murder with a very serious aggravating circumstance. According to the police, the man was essentially lured into a deadly trap. They faced life in prison without the possibility of parole for this crime. 2 years passed, which the young criminals spent in prison awaiting trial. The girl was 19 years old, and her brother was 21 at the start of the trial. They were ordered to be tried as adults, but separately. First, Bray's trial took place, and then Tim's stepson was brought before the court. At this time, Bray's trial was still ongoing. Initially, the girl refused to testify against her brother, which significantly complicated the prosecutor's task, as he did not have material evidence directly pointing to Nathan's involvement in the murder. Neither the youth's fingerprints nor his DNA were found at the crime scene or on the weapon. According to forensic experts, the revolver showed only trace evidence of the crime victim and both children. Since the revolver belonged to their mother, the children could have handled it previously. The prosecutor had to convince the jury of the young people's guilt using only circumstantial evidence. Specifically, a mask with Nathan's DNA was found, as well as witness descriptions that identified the youth as the person fleeing the scene. The jury's deliberation over the case materials took a whole day, and the jury returned with an unexpected decision. 7 voted for the guilt and 5 for the innocence of Bray. Thus, a retrial was required, which disappointed the prosecution. However, the defense attorneys felt more confident. During the same period, it became known that the investigators had not provided the prosecution with a crucial interrogation of Nathan with his confession of the murder. The recording contained crucial information that could completely change the course of the case. The judge presiding over the case forbade the use of this interrogation recording before the jury, since the youth, upon realizing what he had said, had requested a lawyer. His statement should not have been heard without the presence of a defense representative, especially since Nathan was a minor at that time. This was a real blow to the prosecution, effectively depriving them of their main trump card, the criminal's confession. For months had passed since the first jury deadlocked. The new tactic of the prosecution was to conduct a cross-examination for both the brother and sister simultaneously, where they could expose them. The evidence was to be assessed by two separate groups of jurors, with an equal number for each of the accused. According to the prosecution, this would make it possible to see that Bray and Nathan had worked together. The defense attorneys for the young criminals also faced difficulties. Nathan was much easier to defend, as his confession could not be shown to the jury. However, such restrictions did not apply to Bray, so her confession, recorded on camera, was played in court. The lawyers began to argue that the defendant had indeed at some point wanted to put the criminal plan into action out of a sense of revenge against her stepfather, but later abandoned it. But the brothers still carried out the plan. At this stage, Nathan played the main role, who killed his stepfather, despite his sister's pleas not to do so. At the same time, the prosecution asserted that the idea of the murder belonged to the girl, who wanted her stepfather's death due to her personal grievances. But Bray's lawyer convinced the jury that her brother did not let her out of the plan, pointing a weapon at her and threatening to kill her. However, there was so much deceit in this story that the jury was not going to take the unsubstantiated claims at face value. In addition, her confession was recorded, and the jury was able to watch this video. At that moment, a new participant entered the game. This was an informant in the person of a cellmate who had communicated with Nathan in prison while he was awaiting trial. According to the inmate convicted of drug trafficking, it was Bray who influenced Nathan the most. She was the initiator and inspirer of the crime from beginning to end and persuaded him to commit the murder. The story he told coincided with the version that Nathan had voiced during the interrogation. However, the defense immediately began to seize on the inaccuracies in the witness's story. In addition, the lawyers focused on the fact that he had a rich criminal history, which was somehow related to lying. This was done to cast doubt on his words and also to turn the jury against him. At the same time, Nathan confirmed that he had not told his cellmate all the details that he had voiced in court and believed that someone had intentionally told him this information. This case had been widely publicized, so some of the information a witness might have known could have been gleaned from the internet. This could have distorted their account, making it less credible. To convince the jury that Nathan was a cruel and dangerous person, the girl's lawyers brought his ex-girlfriend to court. She tearfully admitted that he had raped and mistreated her. The boy was shocked, stating that this was his former girlfriend, whom he had broken up with in high school, and that the scene she described had never happened. He claimed she was simply there to get revenge on him. The final incriminating evidence against the two criminals was a letter written by Bray on the night she was arrested. The letter wasn't addressed to anyone, as the girl had intended to take her own life after writing it. However, she was unable to go through with it. The letter stated that the murder of her stepfather was meant to be easy, quick, and clean. One shot to the head, and that would be that. The girl fully confessed her guilt in this note and stated that she never intended to back out of the plot. According to her, she manipulated her brother until he carried out the plan. However, she retracted this testimony in court, attributing everything written to her emotional state. But it seemed that no one believed her. The testimony lasted for 2 weeks, and now the case was in the hands of the jury. Before they went to deliberate and make their decision, Bray stated that she didn't care what happened. She mentioned that she had been suicidal since the age of 11. Therefore, she would simply die in a few months. At the same time, she believed she should be acquitted while her brother should be imprisoned because he was dangerous, and Bray would be afraid to walk on the same street as him. In turn, Nathan hoped to be acquitted. The verdict on the girl's case was reached quite quickly. It took the jury only 6 hours. However, the jurors working on Nathan's case spent much more time, considering his guilt to be controversial and it took them 2.5 days to reach a decision. In the end, the jury decided that they were both guilty of first-degree murder. Nathan was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Bray's sentence was harsher. The jurors found her also guilty of organizing a deadly trap, which was an aggravating circumstance. Therefore, she was to spend the rest of her life in prison without the possibility of parole. Tim's family was pleased with this outcome, but they also showed magnanimity. The victim's biological daughter asserted that she sympathized with her stepbrother and stepsister, as they had taken the lives not only of her beloved father, but also of themselves. His biological daughter doesn't understand how the children he had practically raised could kill a stepfather who was like a father to them. Erin herself grew up with her mother and communicated with her father much less often than Bray and Nathan. On the first anniversary of Tim's death, his daughter got married. This date had been set before the tragedy, and the newlyweds did not postpone it. In 2015, Bray managed to appeal the sentence, and her term was reduced to 26 years. If you enjoyed my work, please subscribe to the channel, support this video with a like, and let's discuss this story in the comments. And I recommend watching these videos. Thank you all and goodbye.